Some people in California just don't count, or can't be counted. Hi, I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, there is a story, I believe, out of KTVU.com, that's very difficult to say, that 100,000 plus mail-in ballots in the March primary election in California could not be counted. Now, the headline is a lot saucier than the actual story is, because if you scroll down a little bit, you find out that 70,330 of those ballots actually couldn't be counted because they weren't mailed before Election Day or didn't arrive within 3 days of Election Day, which is the window that you have to get your mail-in ballots in. But about 27,525 of them either didn't have a signature or had a signature that didn't match the one on record. Now, Bill, previously you've been a critic of mail-in balloting, except in extraordinary circumstances like for our military and things like that, but you don't want to see widespread use because of the opportunity for fraud. It looks to me, Bill, like they were very careful about counting these things, and anybody who didn't meet the requirements was disqualified. Doesn't that give you encouragement?
Not so much. There's a video of a guy who was much smaller election, a local county election or something. He was running for county commissioner or something, and there's like parking lot video of a mailman taking thousands of his mail out, promotional documents and just chucking them in the garbage. The first question I have about this—
And that guy's a government employee, you're saying, who did something like that? That shocks me.
Shocks me too, Scotty. So the first question I have when I hear stories like that, 100,000 write-in ballots were not able to be cast because of errors. It makes me ask, first of all, well, what's the failure rate for regular ballots? I'm not defending mail-in voting. I think it's a catastrophe. I think it's the last chance that the progressives have, and that's just by cheating on a massive scale. But you have to ask yourself, out of how many votes cast, how many of them are just defective for reasons like warrants signed, or how many ballots are invalid because they voted for two people for the same office, or that kind of thing. So I don't know that the fact that they're mail-in ballots necessarily means that there's the higher likelihood of a voided ballot because it was mailed in. The mail-in problems are much bigger, and the vote harvesting here in California is much bigger than that.
Well, apparently the areas where you would think that there'd be the most corruption is actually experiencing the most failure to vote. For example, in San Francisco, some 9,407 ballots, nearly 5% of the total mail-in ballots, were set aside, mostly because they didn't get there on time. So this is in the heart of the Democratic vote, and one would assume that most of those votes would have been from Democrats, but they just didn't make the time crunch.
If this cancel culture and lawlessness and all the rest of this stuff continues, there may not be many Democrats left, honestly. I'm not saying that's the explanation for it, but it could be. There is no question that huge numbers of Democrats are simply, for the first time in their lives, being called white nationalists because they, sing the national anthem and other racist, tavern songs. And I think that there is an enormous tectonic movement going on out there, appropriate enough for California, well below the surface where it's not visible. But I can't help the feeling that the progressives have overplayed their hands so strongly that huge numbers of people who would have otherwise voted Democrat either enthusiastically or not enthusiastically just aren't going to do it anymore. Might be wrong about that, but I got a feeling. And it is the hardcore progressives are going to vote the way they always do. But there's so many centrist Democrats, as they used to be anyway, who no longer can stand on that platform, and that may account for the vote shortage in San Francisco area. I'd be curious to see how the vote percentage was in more conservative areas of California. In the inner the valley, for example, the Central Valley of California, it's the whole state's virtually red if you really look at it by county.
Now, the overall percentage actually wasn't much different from the number of, for want of a better word, let's call them spoiled mail-in ballots that happened on a national level in 2016 in that presidential election. So, in California, in the primary in March, it was 1.5%. Nationwide in 2016, it was 1.4%. Here's another thing that I think might give you a little bit of encouragement, Bill. Los Angeles County, nearly 2,800 ballots were nullified because the voter forgot to sign it. And the end of the sentence says, then couldn't be found to fix the error. Bill, that implies that they went looking for the people and to give them a chance to make sure that they had an opportunity to sign their ballot. They didn't just throw away your vote because you neglected to sign it. They wanted to make sure that you had a chance. Is that good or
So
bad?
you're saying well, I guess you could say it's good news in that they at least claim to be doing due diligence trying to find the person that signed the vote, but the ballot. But it seems to me that if you can't find the person that signed the ballot, chances are pretty good that ballot was signed by a person who's no longer among the living. And I don't know if they checked cemeteries, but that's probably where I would have gone first. And that is another indication to me that if they have a significant number of ballots, or whatever the number of ballots, and they go hunting them down because this was a mistake, and we need to find the person who mailed in this ballot. And let them know what happened. If we can't find them, then maybe they don't exist.
Well, Bill, like another issue related to voting, I'm afraid you're not taking into account the difficulty of acquiring writing instruments, the expense of that, the distance that people have to travel to get a pen, for example.
Postage.
Yes, postage, all of that.
Which postage costs money, which means it preferentially protects the rich. And is a way of suppressing the poor urban vote is because of the postage that you have to put on a ballot. By the way, surely ballots they don't require postage, right?
Probably not. But I liked where you were going with it, so I decided not to step in.
Sure, why not? But you get the idea, right? It's like we live in a world now where anything will be trotted out, And for those of us who are on the side of reality and some idea of external truth, these are very difficult times. But at the same time, the degree to which the left is looking for things that aren't there, looking for racism that's not there, and just generally be clowning themselves, I think is helping us enormously. This thing with Bubba, I forget his last name, the driver who claimed there was a noose in there, and it turned out it was just a slip knot to pull down the garage door. He doubled down on it. He said, "No, damn it, it's a noose." And other writers said, "No, there were 60 garages and only one of them had this noose." The noose is this big, it's this big. Nobody seems to be talking about this.
So
it's like. But my point is, if you're seeing nooses in a loop of clothesline that's this big, then that tells me that actual genuine injustice isn't really here, not in any significant numbers. And so, there you go. You just have to invent the stuff. And that's what all of this stuff, I think, is driving the middle of the country far to the right, out of the Democratic camp, some into the Republican camp. But if you turn a Democrat into a Republican, you pick up 2 votes. It's 1 vote that the Democrats didn't get. That's 1 vote that the Republicans did get. But if you get to a point where the Democratic Party platform is so repugnant that Democrats couldn't possibly vote for Trump, but they decide not to vote for the Democrats either, then that is a catastrophe for them. And I think they're facing big problems in that regard.
Now, people who are voting rights activists are, of course, concerned anytime anybody's vote isn't counted. And Bill, in this situation, it just makes one wonder, if you're a voting rights activist, and I admire somebody who wants to make sure everybody gets a chance to vote, at what point do you say perhaps the voter has some responsibility? For example, if the ballot must be mailed by Election Day and must arrive within 3 days of Election Day, then that's the voter's responsibility. If the ballot must be signed and out of 7 million ballots, 1.5% of the people didn't sign it, is At some point, if you're an activist, don't you throw up your hands and say, listen, folks, you got to help me out here. If you want the right to vote, follow the simple rules.
I'm not really emotionally on the side of the activist because I feel that number one, voting is accessible and possible and doable by every single American. If you cannot get yourself by bus or bicycle or bum a ride or whatever, or drive down there in your Mercedes, if you can't once every 2 years get down to a place and cast a vote, then you're not required to, but you can't complain about what a horrible tyranny this is. That is a minimum obligation for citizenship, minimum. And there's nothing terribly difficult about it. When you talk about things like this, on some level, whether people like it or not, you are setting an extremely low bar, but it is a low bar IQ test and it's a low bar responsibility test. If you can't do this, if you don't take it seriously enough so that the ballot gets there on time, you're probably not the kind of person that is going to be making a responsible choice as far as the future of the republic goes. And that's not to exclude anybody, but it does say something about this. So if an activist says, hey, work with me here, the number that we're talking about, you said 1.5%, 2%, maybe general vicinity. That's not a terrific, incredibly large failure rate number. But the thing that is terrifying is this idea of vote harvesting, where somebody will basically go around and take a ballot with them and get, or a number of ballots with them and get people to fill them out and sign them, and then that person brings them in, which is happening here in California, and then. You have an individual who can make the decision of, well, this person didn't sign their ballot, but that might be a Republican, so we just let that one go. It's all very simple, really. It really is. It's all this voter by mail vote and all of it. It's very, very, very simple. We have an election day for the specific reason that physical human beings cannot be in two places at the same time. And that everybody who goes that day is accounted for. That's how it's supposed to work. And if you cannot find enough time once every 2 years to go down and do become part of this process, then you don't take it seriously enough to be a voting member of the public. It's not an onerous burden of every 2 years finding yourself down there standing in line for 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. That is not an enormous demand on a citizen in order for all the freedoms and protections that they enjoy. And if you're not willing to do that and do it correctly, then you forfeit your right to help determine the course of this nation. You still get the protections, you still get the benefits, you still get all of that stuff. But if you can't do something that simple because you're just basically too irresponsible, then it's probably a good thing that you're not in the mix of people who are trying to determine where this country's going. Because if you can't do that fundamental basic minimum of citizenship, then you're not really a citizen at all, really, are you?
If you'd like to be part of a team that values liberty with responsibility, you might want to join us over at BillWhittle.com. Click that big green Become a Member button and find out what it's like to be surrounded by a team of liberty lovers who value our Constitution and the founding principles upon which this country was established. If you haven't done that yet, now's the time. We'll provide a link in the description below. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.